Ilara stood at the center of the great hall, the cold of the stone floor pressing through the thin soles of her ceremonial boots. The dress they had given her was deep crimson, the waist cinched so tight she had to breathe in careful, measured pulls. She had not complained when they laced it. She had learned a long time ago that complaints in this palace had a way of costing more than silence. She was 15 years a ward of the Black Claw Court, brought here at 8 years old, a princess of the small tributary kingdom of Saran, handed over by her father like a promissory note. A hostage dressed in silk, a guarantee that Saran would keep paying its tribute, keep bowing its head, keep sending its grain north to fill Black Claw's storehouses. She had written her father once, in the 3rd year. A single letter, careful and short, because she had already learned that long letters from hostages made the court nervous. "Father, I am well. I hope you are well. I would very much like to come home." He had not written back. She had not written again. Tonight was supposed to be different. Tonight was the moon oath ceremony, the formal binding of the crown prince to his chosen mate. The court had been preparing for weeks. The hall was full. Every noble house of Black Claw, every ambassador, every lord and lady who had traveled to witness the moment the crown prince Kale took his Luna. Ilara had believed, with the particular stubbornness of someone who has very little left to believe in, that she was that Luna. She stood at the center of the hall and waited. Kale walked in from the north door. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in the black and silver of his house. His dark hair was swept back. His jaw was set. He looked, as he always looked, like a man who had already decided everything and was simply waiting for the world to catch up. He did not look at her. He walked to the dais, took his position before the moon priest, and turned to face the hall. The priest began the invocation. Old words, older than the court itself, older than the alliance that had swallowed Saran whole. Ilara listened to the syllables and felt something in her chest begin to pull tight, the way a rope pulls tight before it snaps. He will say her name, she told herself. He will say my name. That is why I am standing here. The priest reached the binding question. Kale's eyes moved across the hall. They passed over her. Stopped. Moved on. "I name no mate this night," Kale said. The hall went very quiet. Ilara heard her own heartbeat. "The ward of Saran," Kale continued, his voice carrying easily to every corner of the room, "has served her purpose as a political guarantee. That purpose is now concluded. Saran's tribute obligations have been renegotiated under the new Eastern Accords. The ward is released from her position." Released. The word landed like a stone dropped into still water. Someone in the crowd murmured. Someone else laughed, quickly suppressed. Ilara did not move. Kale finally looked at her directly. His expression was composed, almost bored, the face of a man closing a ledger entry. "You are free to return to Saran, Ilara of the tributary house. The court thanks you for your years of service." Service. She had been furniture. She had been a line item in a trade agreement. She had been, for 15 years, the girl who sat at the edge of every banquet and learned which lords drank too much and which ladies smiled with their mouths only, and she had genuinely, foolishly thought, that Kale had seen her, that the moments between them had been real. The winter cloak he had dropped over her shoulders in the courtyard when she was shivering and too proud to ask for one. The bowl of broth that had appeared outside her door when she was sick and the court healer had not come. The night 3 years ago when Lord Aldrich's son had cornered her in the east corridor and Kale had appeared from nowhere, said nothing, simply stood there until the man left. She had kept those moments like coins in a locked box. She had counted them in the dark. "He sees me," she had told herself. "He just cannot say it yet." She understood now what those moments had actually been. Not love, not even affection. The occasional maintenance of a useful asset. The way you oil a hinge, so the door keeps working. The pain hit her low and sudden, a cramping pull deep in her abdomen that made her breath catch. She had been feeling it for 3 days, intermittent, easy to dismiss. She dismissed it now too, pressing her hand flat against her stomach before she could stop herself. Kale's eyes dropped to her hand. Something moved across his face. Not guilt. Not quite. A flicker of something she could not name, there and gone in less than a second. From the dais, King Aldrich, Kale's father, the architect of every policy that had shaped the last 15 years of her life, shifted his weight almost imperceptibly. His gaze moved to his son. A small, precise pressure, the kind that did not need words. Kale looked away from her hand. He looked away. The cramping pulled again, sharper this time. Ilara breathed through it. She had been breathing through things in this hall for 15 years. She was very good at it. "The ward will be escorted to the eastern gate," Aldrich said from the dais, his voice pleasant and final. Arrangements have been made for her journey. 2 guards moved toward her from the sides of the hall. She did not wait for them to reach her. She reached into the small pocket sewn into the seam of her dress. She had sewn it herself, 3 years ago, because the dressmakers here did not put pockets in women's clothes, and she took out what she had carried there. A wolf's tooth, carved smooth at the base, threaded on a cord of dark leather. Cale had given it to her 7 years ago, the morning after she had been sick for a week, and he had left the broth outside her door. He had not said anything when he pressed it into her hand. She had not asked what it meant. She had worn it under her dress for 7 years and told herself it meant something. She looked at it for one moment. Then she dropped it on the stone floor. The tooth hit the slate and cracked, the carved base splitting clean from the cord. The sound was small in the large hall. Almost nothing. Cale heard it. She saw him hear it, the slight tension in his jaw, the way his eyes moved to the floor and then back up. He said nothing. He did nothing. From the far left of the hall, near the servants' entrance, a young woman named Mira, a junior court attendant, the kind of girl who had spent 3 years fetching Alara's meals and pretending not to notice when the senior ladies made cutting remarks, took one small step forward. Her face was pale. Her hands were clasped in front of her so tightly her knuckles had gone white. She did not speak. Not yet. But she looked at the cracked tooth on the floor, and then she looked at Alara, and something in her expression shifted from the careful blankness of a court servant into something rawer and less safe. Alara did not look at her. She could not afford to look at anyone right now. The guards reached her. One of them put a hand on her arm, not gently. She pulled her arm free. "I can walk," she said. Her voice came out steady. She was proud of that. The guard hesitated, then stepped back half a pace. From beneath the servants' bench near the east wall, a large silver-gray shape rose to its feet. Vesper had been lying there so still that half the court had apparently forgotten he existed. He was enormous, a northern hunting hound, thick-coated, with a chest like a barrel and a white crescent mark on his breastbone that caught the candlelight. His left ear had an old notch in it from a long-ago encounter with a fence post. The leather collar around his neck was worn dark with age, and carved into it, in the small, uneven letters of a child's hand, were the moon marks of Saran. She had carved them herself. She had been 9 years old, and she had wanted something in this palace that was hers. Vesper walked to her side and stood there. He did not growl. He did not bare his teeth. He simply placed himself between her and the nearest guard with the calm certainty of an animal who has made a decision and does not feel the need to explain it. The guard did not step forward again. Alara walked toward the eastern door. She did not look at Cale. She did not look at the cracked tooth on the floor. She did not look at Mira, who was still standing very still near the servants' entrance with her white-knuckled hands and her changed expression. She walked out of the Moon Oath Hall and into the corridor, and then out through the eastern passage, and then through the gate, and then into the night. The snow had started while she was inside. It was coming down steadily now, fine and dry, the kind that settles without sound. The torches at the gate threw orange light across the white ground. The road south, the road to Saran, was visible for perhaps 50 yards before the dark swallowed it. She stood at the gate and looked at that road for a long moment. Her father had not written back. She knew, with the clarity that comes after the last illusion breaks, exactly what would happen if she went south. Her father would receive her with the particular expression of a man confronted with an inconvenient problem. He would apologize to Black Claw. He would find some new way to make her useful. He would call her ungrateful if she objected. He had always been better at apologizing to powerful men than at protecting his own daughter. She was not going south. The cramping came again, low and insistent. She pressed her hand to her stomach and breathed. Not now, she told whatever was happening inside her. Not yet. Give me until morning. She turned north. Vesper fell into step beside her without hesitation, his broad shoulder brushing her hip, his breath making small clouds in the cold air. She put her hand briefly on the top of his head, not for comfort, she told herself, just to feel something solid, and then she walked. The snow came down around them, and the lights of Black Claw Court fell away behind her, and the road north into the dark was very long and very cold and entirely unknown. She walked anyway. She did not make it as far as she had hoped. The pain had been manageable for the first 2 hours, the kind of thing you can walk through if you set your jaw and think about something else. By the 3rd hour it had become something she had to stop for, bending over with her hands on her knees while Vesper pressed his warm flank against her side and waited. By the time the sky began to lighten toward gray, she was moving in short stretches between rests, and the snow had soaked through her ceremonial boots, and she was beginning to understand that she had made a serious miscalculation about how far a body could carry itself on willpower alone. She had reached the outer edge of the northern reach, the borderland between Black Claw's territory and the wild country that belonged, technically and practically, to the Wolf King of the North. She knew this because the trees had changed. Black Claw's forests were managed, the undergrowth cleared, the paths maintained. These trees were older and closer together, the kind that had been growing without human interference for centuries. The snow here was deeper and undisturbed except for animal tracks. She found a fallen tree wide enough to sit on and sat down. Vesper sat beside her and put his head in her lap with the matter-of-fact tenderness of a dog who has decided this is what the situation requires. "I'm fine," she told him. He did not move his head. "I'm going to be fine," she amended. She was not entirely sure this was true. She was cold in a way that had moved past discomfort into something more serious, and the pain in her abdomen had settled into a deep, constant ache that frightened her more than the sharp cramps had. She had no food. She had the clothes on her back, a small knife she had taken from the kitchen 3 days ago, when she had begun to suspect that the moon oath ceremony might not go the way she had hoped, and a dog the size of a small pony. She was trying to decide whether to keep moving or to find some kind of shelter when Vesper lifted his head. He did not growl. He went very still, his amber eyes fixed on the trees to the north, his nostrils working. Alara's hand went to the knife. The man who stepped out of the trees was not what she expected, though she could not have said afterward exactly what she had expected. He was tall, taller than Kale, broader through the shoulders, dressed in the practical dark clothing of someone who spends a great deal of time outdoors in cold weather. His hair was dark, his face angular, his expression the particular kind of neutral that is not the same as blank. He looked at her the way a person looks at a problem they are in the process of assessing. He stopped at a distance that was, she noticed, far enough away that she could run if she needed to. Or try to run. In her current condition, running was more of a theoretical concept. He looked at her. He looked at Vesper. He looked at the ceremonial dress, now soaked through and ruined, and at the thin boots, and at the way she was sitting with one hand pressed flat against her stomach. "You're on the border of the northern reach," he said. His voice was even, unhurried. "I'm aware," she said. "You came from the south." "Also aware." A pause. He was still doing the assessment thing. It was, she thought, a very thorough assessment. "The nearest Black Claw outpost is about 4 miles back," he said. "If you're trying to return." "I'm not." He looked at her for another moment. Then he looked at Vesper, who had not moved, who was still watching him with those amber eyes, not threatening, simply present. "The collar," the man said. "Those are Saran moon marks." "Yes. You're a long way from Saran." "I'm not going to Saran either." Something shifted in his expression. Not softening exactly. More like a recalibration. He looked at the hand she had pressed against her stomach, and then he looked at her face, and he said nothing about either of those things. "There's a way station about 2 miles north," he said instead. "Inside the reach. Warm. Stocked." She looked at him. "I'm not offering you anything," he said, with a dryness that she recognized as the particular humor of someone who finds most situations faintly absurd. "I'm telling you a fact about the geography. What you do with it is your business." She considered this. "Who are you?" she asked. "Lysander," he said. "I hold the northern reach." She had heard of the Wolf King of the North. Everyone had heard of him. The stories varied. Some said he was a warlord, some said he was a recluse, some said he had not left his territory in a decade. None of the stories had mentioned that he went walking alone in his own borderlands at dawn. "Ilara," she said. "Of Saran." "I know who you are," he said. She was not sure whether to find that reassuring or alarming. She filed it under problems to address when not actively freezing to death, and pushed herself to her feet. The movement sent a fresh wave of pain through her abdomen, and she went still for a moment, breathing carefully. Lysander did not move toward her. He did not reach out. He simply waited, with the patience of someone who has decided that waiting is the correct response and sees no reason to deviate from it. When she had her breath back, she looked at him. 2 miles, she said. 2 miles, he confirmed. "And you're not going to try to send me back to Black Claw?" "No." "Why not?" He considered this with what appeared to be genuine thought. "Because you walked out of Black Claw Court in a ceremonial dress in a snowstorm rather than go back inside," he said. "That seems like a fairly clear statement of preference." She looked at him for a long moment. Vesper stood up, shook the snow from his coat with a great deal of unnecessary drama, and began walking north. Elara followed her dog. The way station was warm as promised and stocked with the basics: dried meat, hard bread, a water barrel that had not frozen, blankets that smelled of cedar and wood smoke. There was a narrow bed against one wall, and a fireplace that Lysander had going within minutes of their arrival. He did not stay. He built the fire, showed her where the food was, and told her that a healer from the nearest northern reach settlement would arrive by midday. "I didn't ask for a healer," she said. "No," he agreed. "I'm sending one anyway." He paused at the door. "You can refuse her when she gets here. That's also your business." He left. Vesper investigated every corner of the way station with great thoroughness, sneezed at something near the woodpile, and then settled himself directly in front of the fire with the satisfied air of a dog who has assessed the situation and found it acceptable. Elara sat on the edge of the bed and ate a piece of hard bread and tried to think clearly. The pain had eased somewhat in the warmth. Not gone. It was still there, a low persistent ache that she was becoming grimly familiar with, but manageable. She pressed her hand flat against her stomach and held it there and tried to count backward through the last several weeks with the careful, methodical attention she had learned to apply to problems she did not want to look at directly. She stopped counting. She sat very still for a long time. Vesper lifted his head from the hearthstone and looked at her with his amber eyes. "Don't," she said. He put his head back down. The healer's name was Bryn. She was a compact, gray-haired woman who arrived at midday exactly as promised, carrying a worn leather satchel and the brisk manner of someone who has seen most things and been surprised by very few of them. She examined Elara with efficient, impersonal thoroughness, asked 3 questions, received 3 honest answers, and then sat back and looked at her with an expression that was not pity and not judgment, and was therefore, Elara thought, the most bearable expression anyone had directed at her in recent memory. "You're about 8 weeks along," Bryn said. "The cramping is stress and cold, and the fact that you walked several miles in inadequate footwear in a snowstorm. You need rest, warmth, food, and to stop doing things like that." "I'll take that under advisement," Elara said. Bryn looked at her steadily. "The child is still with you. You are healthy. Neither of those things will remain true if you push yourself the way you pushed yourself last night." Elara looked at the fire. "Does Lord Lysander know?" she asked. "I report medical information to my patients," Bryn said. "Not to Lord's." She stood, closed her satchel, and paused at the door. "He's asked that you be given whatever you need. That's the extent of his involvement, as far as I'm aware." A brief pause. "He's not a complicated man, in the ways that matter. He says what he means." She left. Elara sat with that information for a while. 8 weeks. The moon oath ceremony had been last night. 8 weeks ago had been the autumn equinox celebration, the one night in the year when the court's rules about separation of the ward's quarters relaxed slightly, when the wine flowed freely and the torches burned late, and she had been, for one evening, something closer to a person than a political instrument. She had thought, afterward, that it had meant something. She was beginning to understand that she had a persistent and apparently incurable habit of thinking things meant something when they did not. She pressed her hand against her stomach again. The ache had settled into something quieter now, less urgent. All right, she thought, not to herself exactly, not to the fire, not to Vesper who was snoring softly on the hearthstone. To something smaller and more specific. "All right. I hear you. We'll figure it out." She stayed in the way station for 4 days. On the 2nd day, Lysander came back. He knocked, which she noted, because it was not a thing she had expected, and waited until she said to come in, and then he came in and sat in the chair across from the fire and looked at her with that same assessing expression. "Bryn says you're recovering," he said. "Bryn is correct." "Good." He looked at the fire for a moment. "When you're ready to move, there's a place for you in the main settlement if you want it. A house. Not a guest room in my hall, a separate house. Your own door." She looked at him. "Why?" she asked. He seemed to consider the question seriously. "Because you're in my territory and you're injured, and you have nowhere else to go," he said. "And because Black Claw Court just publicly discarded a ward they held for 15 years, and I find that politically interesting." "Politically interesting," she repeated. "Among other things," he said, with the faint dryness she was beginning to recognize as his version of humor. "I'm not a weapon," she said. "I'm not going to be used as one. Not by Black Claw, not by my father, not by you. I'm not asking you to be a weapon," he said. "I'm offering you a house." She looked at him for a long moment. He looked back without flinching, without performing patience, simply present in the way that large, unhurried things are present. "I'll think about it," she said. "Take your time. he said, and stood and left. Vesper watched him go, then looked at Alara with an expression that, if translated into human terms, would have read as well, "He seems fine." "Don't," she said again. Vesper sneezed and went back to sleep. On the third day, she asked Lysander about the Northern Reach's relationship with Black Claw. They were sitting at the small table in the way station, eating the kind of plain, adequate meal that Alara had come to associate with the North. Dense bread, hard cheese, dried fruit, hot tea that tasted of pine, and something she could not identify. Lysander ate without ceremony and answered her question without preamble. "Formally neutral," he said. "Practically, Black Claw knows better than to push north. We've had that conversation twice in the last 30 years. They remember how it ended. Aldrich will know I came this way. Yes. He might ask for my return." "He might," Lysander agreed. He broke off a piece of bread. "He won't get it." She watched him. "Just like that," she said. "Just like that." He looked up. "You walked into my territory. You're under my jurisdiction now. Black Claw's claim on you ended at the border." A pause. "That's not sentiment. That's law. The Northern Reach has its own law." "And if he pushes?" Lysander looked at her with an expression that was, she thought, the closest thing to amusement she had seen on his face. "Then he pushes," he said. "And we have the conversation again. And he remembers how it ended." She thought about that. "You're not worried," she said. "No. Why not?" He considered this. "Because Aldrich is a careful man," he said. "Careful men don't start wars over discarded wards. It would raise too many questions about why the ward mattered." The word discarded landed without softening. He had not tried to soften it. She found, to her own surprise, that she preferred that. "My father won't fight for me either," she said. It came out more flatly than she intended. Lysander did not say "I'm sorry," or "that must be hard," or any of the other things people said when they wanted to acknowledge pain without actually sitting with it. He said, "No, he won't. You know about my father." "I know about most tributary arrangements in this region," he said. "It's useful information." She looked at her tea. "He didn't write back," she said. "When I was 11, I wrote him a letter. He didn't write back." A silence. "What did you do?" Lysander asked. "I stopped writing," she said. "And I learned everything I could about how Black Claw Court worked. Who held power, who owed favors to whom, which lords were loyal to Aldrich and which ones were loyal to the idea of Aldrich, which was different. I learned the kitchens and the storerooms and the guard rotations." She paused. "I thought if I made myself useful enough, I'd be safe." "Were you?" "Safe enough," she said. "Not the same thing." He nodded slowly, as if she had confirmed something he had already suspected. He did not tell her she had been brave or clever, or that it was not her fault. He simply accepted what she had said as the true account of a real situation, which was, she was discovering, its own kind of respect. "The house offer stands," he said. "When you're ready." She accepted it the next morning. The Northern Reach settlement was called Verath, and it was nothing like Black Claw Court. Black Claw Court was all marble and ceremony, and the particular kind of beauty that exists to remind you of your own smallness. Verath was stone and timber and practical, built for winters that lasted 6 months and people who had things to do. The streets were wide enough for supply carts. The buildings were solid. The people she passed looked at her with curiosity but not hostility, and several of them nodded to Vesper with the easy familiarity of people who had seen large dogs before and were not impressed. The house Lysander had arranged was small and real. 2 rooms, a fireplace, a window that looked out onto a courtyard where someone had planted a dormant herb garden. There was a proper bed and a kitchen table and hooks on the wall for coats. She stood in the middle of it and breathed. Vesper walked through both rooms, approved of the fireplace, and sat down in front of it. She had not had a door that was only hers since she was 8 years old. She closed it carefully from the inside and stood with her hand on the latch for a moment. Then she went to the kitchen table and sat down and began, for the first time in 15 years, to think about what she actually wanted. The weeks that followed had a rhythm she had not expected. Bryn came every few days. The pregnancy progressed without drama, the cramping eased, the nausea came and went. Her body adjusted to warmth and regular food with the pragmatic efficiency of a system that had been running on insufficient resources for too long and was relieved to have better inputs. She learned Verath. She walked its streets with Vesper at her side, learned which market stalls had the best bread, learned the names of the guards at the settlement gates, learned the particular social geography of a place that was not a court. The way people here spoke to each other directly, the way disputes were settled in the open rather than through layers of implication and favor trading. She and Lysander fell into a pattern of irregular meals and irregular conversations that were, she thought, the most honest exchanges she had had with another person in years. He did not perform warmth. He did not manage her. He said what he thought, asked what he wanted to know, and left her alone when she needed to be left alone, which was often. One evening, about 3 weeks after her arrival, she came back from a walk to find him sitting on the step outside her house with Vesper's enormous head in his lap, looking deeply inconvenienced by this development, but making no move to dislodge the dog. "He just sat on me," Lysander said, with the tone of a man reporting an unprovoked attack. "He does that," she said. "He's decided you're acceptable." "I'm honored," he said, in a voice that suggested he was not entirely sure he was. She sat on the step beside him. The evening was cold and clear, the kind of northern night where the stars were very bright and very close. Vesper shifted his weight, redistributing himself across both of them with magnificent indifference to their opinions on the matter. "He's heavy," Lysander observed. "He knows," she said. A comfortable silence, the kind she had not had in a long time. "Cale hasn't sent anyone," she said. "No." Aldrich sent a formal inquiry. "You didn't tell me." "I handled it," he said. "There was nothing to tell." She looked at him. There was something to tell. It was about me. He met her eyes. "You're right," he said, without deflection. "I should have told you. I won't do that again." She held his gaze for a moment, checking for the particular quality of a man who says what you want to hear. She did not find it. She found instead the quality of a man who has made a mistake, acknowledged it, and moved on, which was rarer than it should have been. "What did the inquiry say?" she asked. "That you were a ward of Black Claw Court who had left without authorization, and that the court requested your return for the completion of certain administrative formalities." "Administrative formalities," she repeated. "Yes." A pause. "I replied that you had entered the northern reach of your own volition, that you were under northern jurisdiction, and that the northern reach did not return people to courts that had publicly discarded them at a moon oath ceremony." Another pause. "I may have phrased that last part more diplomatically." "May have. Slightly more diplomatically," he said. She looked at the stars for a moment. "Thank you," she said. "You don't need to thank me for following my own law," he said. "I know," she said. "I'm thanking you anyway." Vesper sighed heavily, and went to sleep on both of them. It was Mira who came first. Elara had not expected that. She had thought, if anyone came from Black Claw, it would be a guard or a messenger or some minor court official with a formal document. She had not expected the junior court attendant who had stood white-knuckled near the servants' entrance on the night of the moon oath ceremony to appear at the gates of Verath 6 weeks later, travel-worn and frightened, and carrying a small sealed packet. The guards brought her to Elara's house. Elara opened the door and looked at her. Mira looked back. She had clearly been crying recently, though she was not crying now. She was holding herself with the careful stillness of someone who is frightened and is trying very hard not to show it. "I didn't know where else to go," Mira said. Elara stepped back from the door. "Come in." Vesper assessed Mira from his position by the fire, decided she was not a threat, and went back to sleep. Mira looked at him with the expression of someone who had not previously encountered a dog that large in a domestic setting. "He's fine," Elara said. "Sit down. I'll make tea." She made tea. Mira sat at the kitchen table and wrapped her hands around the cup and told her story in the halting, careful way of someone who has been rehearsing it and is still not sure how it will be received. She had been a court attendant for 4 years. She had watched, as all the lower court staff watched, the particular dynamic between the Crown Prince and the ward from Saran. The way Cale would sometimes notice Elara and sometimes look through her. The way Elara had learned to be useful and quiet and present without demanding anything. Mira had not been kind to her. She had not been cruel either, not directly, but she had laughed at the right moments and looked away at the wrong ones and told herself it was not her business. On the night of the moon oath ceremony, she had watched Elara drop the wolf's tooth on the floor. She had watched it crack. She had watched Cale hear it and say nothing. She had gone back to her quarters that night and been unable to sleep. In the morning, she had gone to the moon oath hall before the cleaning staff arrived. She had found the cracked tooth and the broken cord. She had picked them up and put them in her pocket, not knowing why, acting on some instinct she could not have named. 3 days later, Cale had come looking for them. "He tore apart her old rooms," Mira said, her voice low. "Not angry. I mean, he was angry, but it wasn't like breaking things. It was like he was looking for something he'd lost and couldn't find, and was starting to panic about it." She paused. He asked everyone on the staff if they'd seen a wolf's tooth on a leather cord. He asked the cleaning staff. He asked the guards. Elara looked at her tea. He didn't find it, Mira said. Because I had it. She pushed the small sealed packet across the table. I kept it. I don't know why I kept it. I think I thought, I don't know what I thought, that it might matter someday. That someone should have it who understood what it meant. Elara looked at the packet. She did not touch it. What happened to you? She asked. Why did you leave? Myra's hands tightened around her cup. Lord Aldrich's steward came to me 2 weeks ago. He said there were questions about what I had seen on the night of the ceremony. Whether I had observed anything irregular. About the ward's condition. A pause. He said it would be better for me if I confirmed that I had seen nothing unusual. That the ward had appeared healthy and composed throughout. Elara went very still. He was asking you to say I wasn't in pain, she said. Yes. Because if you confirmed I was in pain, if you confirmed I was holding my stomach. It would raise questions, Mira said quietly. About what kind of pain? About timing. About what the Crown Prince might have known and chosen not to ask about. A silence. I didn't confirm it, Mira said. I said I hadn't been paying close attention. Which was a lie, but it wasn't the lie he wanted. She looked up. He'll come back. He'll push harder. I couldn't stay there and keep lying in the direction they wanted me to lie. Elara looked at her for a long moment. You could have just confirmed it, she said. It would have been easier. I know, Mira said. Why didn't you? Mira was quiet for a moment. Because I watched you drop that tooth, she said finally. And I watched him not move. And I thought someone should have moved. Someone should have done something. I didn't do it then. She met Elara's eyes. I'm trying to do it now. Elara looked at the sealed packet on the table. She picked it up. She could feel the shape of the broken tooth through the paper, the 2 pieces of it, the cracked base and the cord. She set it down again without opening it. You can stay here, she said. Varath has a healer who needs an assistant. Bryn. She's good. She'll work you hard. She paused. It's not a court position. I know, Mira said. It's better than a court position, Elara said. But it's not easy. I don't need easy, Mira said. I need somewhere that isn't there. Elara nodded once. Then stay. Back in Black Claw Court, things were going wrong in the specific, cascading way that things go wrong when a system has been held together by one person's invisible labor, and that person is no longer there. Cale had not understood, until Elara left, how much of his daily functioning had been quietly organized around her presence. Not obviously, she had never been given an official role, never been acknowledged as anything more than the ward from Saran. But she had been there. She had known which lords needed to be seated apart at formal dinners and why. She had known which trade delegations required careful handling and which could be managed with standard protocol. She had known, with the particular knowledge of someone who has spent 15 years watching a court from its edges, exactly where the pressure points were and how to avoid them. Without her, he kept stepping on them. The Thornfield delegation left the autumn summit insulted by a seating arrangement that Elara would have corrected before it was ever finalized. The Salt Road negotiations stalled because he had not known, had never thought to ask, that the Eastern merchants had a long-standing grievance with Black Claw's tariff structure that Elara had been quietly managing for 2 years through careful conversation and strategic information sharing. His wolf was restless in a way it had not been since adolescence. He slept badly. He made decisions that he second-guessed afterward, which was new. He had always been certain, or at least had always performed certainty convincingly. Now the certainty felt hollow. He went back to her rooms 3 days after the ceremony. He told himself he was checking that the staff had cleared them properly. He stood in the middle of the empty space and looked at the window she had always kept slightly open, even in winter, because she said the cold air helped her think, and he understood with sudden, unwelcome clarity that he had known her better than he had ever admitted to himself. He had known she kept that tooth. He had given it to her without explanation, and she had never asked for one, and he had watched her, over the years, in the way you watch something you are pretending not to watch, and he had known she still had it because he had never seen her without it, the slight weight of it under her dress, the way her hand would sometimes move to her collarbone without her seeming to notice. He had watched her drop it on the floor. He had watched it crack. He had said nothing. He found the cleaning staff. He asked about the tooth. He asked the guards. He asked everyone who had been in the hall that night. No one had seen it. No one had picked it up. He went back to the hall and got on his hands and knees on the stone floor and looked, which was not a thing crown princes of Black Claw were supposed to do, and he did not care, and he found nothing. He sat on the floor of the Moon Oath Hall for a long time. He thought about the way she had pressed her hand against her stomach. He thought about the way she had breathed. He thought about the fact that he had seen it and understood it and looked away because his father's eyes had been on him and the court had been watching and the political calculus of the moment had been very clear and he had chosen the calculus. He had chosen the calculus. He sat on the cold stone floor and understood, for the first time, what that choice had actually cost. He left for the north 6 weeks later. He did not tell his father. He told his father's steward that he was going on a hunting expedition to the eastern forests, which was the kind of lie that would hold for perhaps 4 days before Aldrich's network of informants corrected it. He did not particularly care. Something in him had stopped caring about the things he had always cared about, and the space where that caring had been was occupied now by something louder and less manageable. He had the 2 pieces of the wolf's tooth. He had found them, finally, through a chain of inquiry that had eventually led him to a junior court attendant who had already left for the north, which told him something he filed away for later. He had paid a craftsman to fit the cracked pieces back together, with a thin band of silver at the break. It was visible, the repair. It did not look like it had never broken. It looked like something that had broken and been put back together, which was, he thought, the most honest thing he had done in years. He rode north with 2 guards he trusted, and the tooth in his breast pocket, and the particular grim focus of a man who has decided to do something, and is not entirely sure it is the right thing, but cannot stop himself from doing it. He reached the outer border of the Northern Reach on the 4th day. The Northern Reach border guards were polite, efficient, and absolutely immovable. Lord Lysander does not receive unannounced visitors from Black Claw Court, the senior guard said, with the pleasant finality of someone delivering a policy rather than a personal opinion. I'm not here to see Lysander, Cale said. Then who are you here to see? A pause. Ilara of Saran, he said. The guard looked at him for a long moment. Wait here, he said, and went inside the gatehouse. He came back 20 minutes later. Lord Lysander says the lady will be informed of your presence. Whether she chooses to receive you is her decision. You'll wait at the outer way station. You will not enter the settlement without her explicit permission. Your guards will remain at the border. Cale looked at the gate. Fine, he said. Ilara received the message from Lysander's runner while she was in the courtyard, watching Vesper attempt to excavate something from the frozen herb garden with the focused determination of a dog who has detected something interesting and will not be deterred by minor obstacles like solid ground. The message was brief. Cale of Black Claw is at the outer border. He's asking for you. Your choice entirely. I've put him at the way station. He can stay there indefinitely or leave. Tell me what you want. She read it twice. Vesper abandoned his excavation and came to sit beside her, leaning his considerable weight against her leg. She was 5 months along now. The pregnancy had become visible in the last few weeks. Not dramatically, but undeniably, the particular change in silhouette that could not be explained away by a heavy coat. She had stopped trying to explain it away. She folded the message. I'll go, she told the runner. Tell Lord Lysander I'll go to the way station. She found Lysander in the hall before she left. He was at his work table, going through correspondence, and he looked up when she came in. You don't have to, he said. I know, she said. I want to. He looked at her for a moment. Do you want company? No, she said. But I want you to know where I am. I'll know where you are, he said simply, and went back to his correspondence. She walked to the way station with Vesper at her side, and her coat buttoned against the cold and her hands steady. Cale was standing outside the way station when she arrived. He had not gone inside. He was standing in the snow with his hands at his sides, and he looked. She registered this with a detachment she had not expected to feel, like a man who had not been sleeping well. The composed certainty she had always associated with him was still there in the structure of his face, but it was sitting differently now, like a coat that no longer fit quite right. He saw her. His eyes went to her face first, then, involuntarily, to the line of her coat. She watched him understand. She watched the understanding move through him. The first assumption, the wrong one, the flash of something raw and ugly across his face that he did not manage to suppress in time. His jaw tightened. His eyes went to the settlement behind her, toward where Lysander's hall would be, and she could see him doing the calculation, the wrong calculation, the one that put her here and Lysander there and arrived at an answer that was not the right answer. Then she watched him recalculate. She watched the moment he counted backward. She watched him arrive at the equinox. She watched his face do something she had never seen it do before. A kind of collapse, not dramatic, not loud, just a quiet structural failure, the way a wall fails when the foundation shifts. He made a sound that was not quite a laugh, and not quite anything else. "It's mine," he said. "Not a question." "Yes," she said. He put his hand over his mouth. He stood there for a moment with his hand over his mouth and his eyes closed, and she watched him and felt, not satisfaction, not grief, something quieter and more final than either. The feeling of a door closing on a room you have already left. He lowered his hand. He reached into his breast pocket and took out the tooth. She could see the silver repair at the break, the thin band of it catching the winter light. "I put it back together," he said. His voice was rough. "I know it doesn't. I know that doesn't mean anything. I know it doesn't fix anything. He stopped. "I needed you to know that I looked for it. That I understood what it meant when you dropped it." "You understood what it meant when I dropped it in the hall," she said. "You understood it then. You chose not to ask." "Yes," he said. "Your father looked at you, and you chose not to ask." "Yes." "I was in pain," she said. "You saw it. You knew something was wrong. And you chose the room." He did not try to explain it. He did not offer her the reasons she already knew. The political moment, his father's expectations, the weight of the court watching. He just stood there with the repaired tooth in his hand and said, "Yes, I did." Vesper, who had been sitting at Alara's side with the patient stillness of a dog who is paying close attention, stood up. He did not growl. He walked forward 3 paces and sat down again, directly between Alara and Kale, and looked at Kale with his amber eyes. Kale looked at the dog. "I'm not going to hurt her," he said. Vesper did not move. Kale looked back at Alara. He took a step toward her. She hit him. Not a wild swing, a clean, deliberate strike, the flat of her palm against his cheek, hard enough to turn his head. The sound of it was sharp in the cold air. He went still. She stood with her hand at her side and looked at him. Her voice, when she spoke, was very even. "That is for the Moonoth Hall," she said. "For seeing it and saying nothing. For choosing the room." She paused. "I'm not going to do it again. I'm not going to spend any more of myself on you. But I needed you to know that I know exactly what you chose, and I needed you to feel it." He turned his face back toward her. There was a mark on his cheek. He did not touch it. "I know," he said quietly. "I'm not coming back," she said. "Not to Black Claw. Not to you. Not to any version of what we were. I know that too. The child is mine," she said. "Not yours to claim, not yours to use, not yours to build a political case around. Mine." Something moved in his face at that, pain, real and unperformed. "I'm not here to claim anything," he said. "I don't have the right to claim anything." "No," she said. "You don't." He looked at the tooth in his hand. Then he held it out to her. She looked at it. The silver repair gleamed at the break. "Keep it," she said. "I don't want it back. I want you to carry it and remember that you understood what it meant and chose not to ask." She paused. "That's the only thing I want from you." He closed his hand around it. Vesper walked back to Alara's side and sat down. She turned and walked back toward Verath. Behind her, she heard Lysander's guards moving, quiet, efficient, the sound of a man being escorted back to the border without drama or ceremony. She did not look back. Kale returned to Black Claw Court. He went to his father. The conversation was not short, and it was not quiet, and it ended with Kale placing on Aldrich's desk a document he had spent the journey home drafting. A formal accounting of the ward system's history, the specific conditions of Alara's placement, the events of the Moon Oath ceremony, and the evidence, gathered from court records and his own memory, of what Aldrich's steward had attempted to do with Mira. "You tried to suppress a witness," Kale said. "You tried to make sure no one could ask questions about what I saw and chose not to act on. You made me complicit in something I didn't fully understand I was being made complicit in." Aldrich looked at the document. "You're being dramatic." "I'm being accurate," Kale said. "There's a difference." He left the document on the desk and walked out. The document, as documents in courts tend to do, did not stay on the desk. It moved. It was copied. It reached the hands of lords who had their own reasons to be interested in Aldrich's methods, lords who had their own tributary arrangements and their own questions about how those arrangements were managed. It reached the Eastern merchant delegations who had been waiting for an opening. It reached, through channels that Kale did not trace and did not try to trace, the northern reach. It reached Saran. Alara's father, confronted with a formal accounting of his daughter's 15 years as a political hostage and the specific events of the moon oath ceremony, did something she had not expected. He was ashamed. Not enough to have acted differently at the time, she did not grant him that revision, but enough to stop cooperating with Aldrich's version of events. Enough to send a letter, finally 15 years too late, that said I should have written back. I am sorry. I do not expect forgiveness. She read the letter twice. She put it in the drawer of her kitchen table. She did not write back, not yet. She was not ready to decide what she wanted to do with her father's belated shame. She filed it under problems to address when I have more capacity and went back to her life. The political pressure built through the winter. Aldrich's position weakened as the document circulated and the questions multiplied. The tributary lords grew restless. The eastern merchants withdrew from negotiations. The Salt Road Alliance, which had been Aldrich's primary leverage over the southern territories, began to fray. In the northern reach, Elara watched this from a distance and felt, not satisfaction exactly, but the particular clarity of someone watching a structure fail that was always going to fail, that had been held together by the suppression of too many true things for too long. Lysander told her, one evening over dinner, that there was going to be a formal hearing. A moon oath review, an ancient mechanism, rarely invoked, that allowed the legitimacy of a moon oath ceremony to be challenged on grounds of procedural violation or concealed material fact. Someone filed it, he said. Who? Cale, he said. He filed it against his own father's conduct of the ceremony. She looked at her plate. He's trying to fix it, she said. He's trying to do something, Lysander said. Whether it fixes anything is a different question. I don't need him to fix it, she said. I know, he said. But you might want to be there when it's heard. She thought about that. Where? She asked. The Moon Oath Hall, he said. Where else? She went back in the early spring, when the roads were passable and her pregnancy was 7 months along, and Bryn had cleared her for travel with the specific caveat that she was not to stand for long stretches, argue with old men for the pleasure of it, or pretend endurance was the same thing as health. If anyone starts shouting, Bryn had said while packing her satchel with more bandages than the journey reasonably required, you sit down. If they object, I will explain anatomy to them until they regret having ears. That sounds alarming, Elara said. It is meant to. Mira came with them, because the hearing needed witnesses, and because she had discovered, in the months since leaving Black Claw, that fear did not vanish simply because you crossed a border. Sometimes it had to be walked back into the room and made to answer for itself. Lysander came because the hearing was being held under a treaty mechanism that required a neutral sovereign witness, and also because Vesper had planted himself on the hem of his cloak that morning and refused to move until everyone accepted the obvious arrangement. He is not a legal authority, Lysander had said, looking down at the dog. Vesper had looked back at him with calm amber certainty. He has opinions, Elara said. So I see. They entered Black Claw Court just after noon. The palace looked exactly as it had in winter. The towers were still black stone. The banners were still silver-edged. The long approach still forced visitors to look upward, as if the architecture itself expected obedience. Elara had once thought the place enormous beyond measure. Now it looked carefully designed to make frightened people forget that walls were only walls. Her father had arrived before them. She saw him in the outer hall, standing with the Saran delegation beneath a row of cold windows. He looked older than she remembered, though memory was unreliable in matters of parents. He saw her and took one step forward, then stopped. His eyes moved to her pregnancy, then to her face, then to Vesper, who had positioned himself beside her with the full gravity of a border checkpoint. Elara, her father said. She waited. The silence that followed was not long, but it contained 15 years. I received the record, he said. His voice was lower than she remembered. I read it. Good, she said. He flinched. Not visibly enough for most of the hall to notice. She noticed. I should have come for you, he said. Yes. Another silence. He did not ask to touch her. He did not ask for forgiveness. For that, at least, she gave him credit. Saran will testify, he said. I have signed a withdrawal from the hostage clauses in the Eastern Tribute Agreements. Whether Black Claw accepts it or not, Saran will no longer send children as guarantees. Elara looked at him for a long moment. It was late. It was not enough. It was still something. Then say that in the hall, she said. He bowed his head once. The Moon Oath Hall was brighter than she remembered. That was not true, of course. The candles were the same. The high windows were the same. The old silver inlays along the floor were the same. The difference was that she was not standing at the center waiting to be named, dismissed, claimed, or escorted away. She entered through the western witness door, under northern escort, with Mira at her left, Bryn at her right, Lysander behind her, and Vesper moving at her side as if the entire court had been arranged for his inspection. People stared. Alara let them. Cale was already there. He stood below the dais, not on it. That alone told her something. He wore plain black court clothing, without the silver ceremonial chain of the crown prince. His face turned when she entered, and for 1 second everything in him went still. Then his eyes lowered, not in shame performed for an audience, but in acknowledgement. He did not approach her. King Aldrich sat on the dais. He looked precisely as he had on the night of the ceremony, composed, elegant, unpleasantly calm. His hair was silver at the temples, his hands rested lightly on the carved arms of his chair, and his expression suggested that every person in the room was a matter of administration. Alara had spent 15 years learning that expression. It had shaped her childhood more effectively than any tutor. The old moon priest stood before the altar with the review tablets open in front of him. He was not the priest from the winter ceremony. That man, apparently, had resigned 3 days after Cale's petition was accepted and had gone to a monastery where no one asked him procedural questions. Alara found this convenient of him. The review of the winter moon oath ceremony is called, the old priest said. Petition filed by Cale of Black Claw against the conduct of King Aldrich of Black Claw, on grounds of concealed material fact, unlawful witness pressure, and misuse of ward release authority. A murmur moved through the hall. Aldrich let it pass before he spoke. This is an indulgence, he said. My son has confused private regret with public law. The ward was released. She left. Whatever sentimental attachment he now discovers is unfortunate, but not a matter for this hall. Cale looked at his father. I did not file this because of sentiment, he said. No. Aldrich's mouth curved faintly. Then why? Cale reached into the inner pocket of his coat and took out the repaired wolf tooth. The hall quieted in a way that felt almost physical. Alara did not look away from it. The silver band around the break caught the candlelight. She felt no desire to take it back. That surprised her less than it would have a few months ago. Because I gave this to Alara 7 years before the ceremony, Cale said. Because I knew she kept it. Because when she dropped it on the floor after I publicly dismissed her, I knew exactly what she was telling me. Because I saw her in pain and chose not to ask why. Because when a witness saw the same thing, your steward tried to pressure her into denying it. That is not private regret. That is conduct. Aldrich's expression did not change. You are confessing your own weakness. Not mine. Yes, Cale said. I am confessing mine. Now we can discuss yours. The hall went so quiet that Alara heard Bryn make a small, appreciative sound under her breath. The old priest looked over the tablets. Witness Mira of Black Claw service. Mira rose. She was pale, but she did not shake when she walked to the witness line. Alara watched her place both hands on the rail, exactly as Bryn had instructed her. A practical grip. A useful one. She told the hall what she had told Alara in the northern house. She spoke of the tooth on the floor, of Cale looking at it and not moving, of Alara pressing a hand to her stomach, of the steward who came later and wanted her to say that she had seen nothing unusual. Aldrich's steward, seated 3 rows below the dais, developed a sudden interest in the floor. Did anyone threaten you? The priest asked. Mira swallowed. Not directly. Speak plainly. He told me that girls who remembered the wrong details often discovered they had no position to return to, Mira said. He said Black Claw was generous to servants who understood discretion. He said the ward from Saran was gone and would not be returning, so there was no use creating trouble for a woman already outside the court's concern. The priest wrote something down. Aldrich's fingers tightened once on the arm of his chair. Bryn testified next. She gave facts, not drama. The date she examined Alara, the likely stage of pregnancy, the cramping brought on by cold, stress, exhaustion, and walking through snow in ceremonial clothing. When Aldrich's advocate asked whether the pregnancy could have begun after Alara entered Northern Territory, Bryn looked at him for so long that the advocate's ears reddened. No, she said. Can you be certain? I am a healer, Bryn said. Not a decorative plant. Yes. A few people coughed. Several were obviously not coughing. Lysander did not smile. That was how Alara knew he wanted to. Then Saran spoke. Her father stood at the southern rail, smaller beneath black claws ceiling than Alara remembered him being in Saran's throne room. He read from a signed statement, voice steady enough for politics and not steady enough for comfort. He confirmed the original ward agreement. He confirmed that Alara had been sent as a guarantee when she was 8 years old. He confirmed that no review had been requested when she reached adulthood, that Saran had continued to accept tribute revisions in exchange for her continued placement, and that he had not answered her childhood letter. That last point was not legally necessary. He said it anyway. Alara looked down at her hands. Vesper, apparently deciding that this portion of the hearing was taking too long and contained insufficient food, lowered himself carefully over her feet. The weight was warm, inconvenient, and grounding. When Alara's name was called, Lysander moved half a step closer, then stopped. He did not touch her. He did not ask if she was sure. He did what he had been doing since the snow forest border. He left the choice in her hands and made the room understand there would be consequences if anyone tried to take it from her. She rose. The hall looked different from the witness rail. Less like a mouth. More like a room full of people who had spent too long confusing height with power. Alara of Saran, the old priest said, you may give your account. She rested one hand on the rail and one hand, briefly, against the curve of her abdomen. I came to Black Claw at 8, she said. I was told I was honored. I learned quickly that honored children do not get to choose where they sleep, whom they speak to, or whether letters are answered. I learned the court because learning was the only way to survive it. I learned who lied politely, who listened at doors, who smiled when they meant to cut, who needed reminders before negotiations, who needed to be seated away from old enemies, who could be bribed with flattery, and who needed the truth delivered where witnesses could hear it. No one moved. I thought usefulness might become safety, she said. It did not. On the night of the ceremony, I stood where I was told to stand. Kale looked at me and released me, as if I were an old contract. I was already in pain. He saw it. His father saw him see it. I was escorted out into snow with no proper clothing, no food, and no plan except the one Black Claw had made for me. Aldrich's advocate stood. The lady left the southern road by choice. Alara turned her head toward him. Yes, she said. That was the first useful choice I had been allowed in 15 years. I recommend making a note of it. The old priest looked down at his tablet. His mouth twitched once, very slightly. The advocate will sit. The advocate sat. Aldrich finally leaned forward. You stand here under northern protection, carrying a Black Claw heir, he said. Consider carefully what you ask this hall to record. There it was. Not regret. Not concern. A claim, reaching across the room with clean hands and old teeth. Alara felt movement under her hand. A small pressure, firm and startling, as if the life inside her had found the timing objectionable. She stood straighter. The child was not an heir when I stood in pain before your son, she said. The child was not an heir when your guards walked me to the gate. The child was not an heir when your steward tried to erase the witness who saw me holding my stomach. Do not discover blood now and call it law. Aldrich's face hardened. Lysander spoke from behind her, his voice flat enough to cut through every murmur before it formed. Northern law recognizes maternal custody when a father publicly releases the mother from his court, fails to inquire after known distress, and permits her removal across a border without protection. Black Claw may contest that in treaty court if it wants the education. Aldrich looked at him. Lysander looked back. The education apparently was not requested. Kale stepped forward. I waive claim, he said. Alara looked at him then. His hand was closed around the repaired tooth. His face was pale, but his voice did not break. I waive any personal, paternal, dynastic, or ceremonial claim Black Claw might attempt to make through me, he said. Any child born of this pregnancy belongs to Alara's house, under the protection she chooses. I will sign it before this hall. I will sign it before Northern law. I will sign it before every treaty witness present. Aldrich stood. For the first time in Alara's memory, the movement was not elegant. You will do no such thing. Kale looked up at his father. I already wrote it. He unfolded a document and placed it on the altar rail. Aldrich took one step down from the dais. You are Crown Prince because I made you Crown Prince. No, Kale said. I am Crown Prince because the court accepted your version of strength. That version has become expensive. A sound went through the hall. Not quite agreement. Not yet. But interest, sharp and dangerous. Cale turned to the assembled lords. I filed this review against my father's conduct, he said. I also submit my own failure to the record. I will not ask this court to pretend I was innocent because I am useful. If Black Claw wants a king who understands law only when grief makes it personal, choose someone else. Aldrich's composure cracked then. Only a little. Enough. You would throw away a crown over a woman who chose another man's protection? Alara felt Lysander go very still behind her. Cale did not look at him. He looked at Alara. No, Cale said. I threw away the right to stand beside her when I chose the room. I am only admitting it where everyone can hear. That was the moment the hall changed. Not because everyone suddenly became moral. Alara was not naive enough to believe in political miracles. The hall changed because the old arrangement had stopped being invisible. Aldrich's power had always depended on people accepting that quiet cruelty was administration, that hostages were diplomacy, that erased witnesses were discretion, and that useful girls could be discarded without consequence. Now all those things had names. Documents, witnesses, treaty observers, a pregnant woman at the rail who had survived long enough to say exactly what had been done. The old priest called for the judgment after an hour of deliberation. The winter moon oath ceremony was entered into the record as procedurally corrupted. The release of the ward was recorded as coercive and negligent. The witness pressure was referred to the council for sanction. All ward clauses involving children from tributary houses were suspended pending review. King Aldrich was not dragged from the dais. Alara had not expected that, and she would not have trusted a justice that looked too much like theater. Instead, the council stripped from him the authority to negotiate tribute, appoint wardens, or conduct moon oath ceremonies until the full council inquiry concluded. It was a careful sentence, a political sentence, the kind that looked mild until you understood that those powers were the bones of his rule. Aldrich understood. He sat back down slowly. Cale signed the waiver before the altar, before the priest, before Saran, before Lysander, before Alara, and before a court that had suddenly become very interested in written records. When it was done, he brought the document to her himself. He did not come too close. Vesper made certain of that. There will be copies sent north, Cale said. Good. He looked as if there were 1,000 other things he wanted to say, and had finally learned that wanting to speak was not the same thing as having the right to be heard. Alara, he said, and stopped. She waited. He looked at the repaired tooth in his hand. Then he put it back into his pocket. I will remember, he said. She nodded once. That was all. She left the Moon Oath Hall through the western witness door. Not the eastern passage. Not the gate road. Not the route used for removals, escorts, and inconvenient girls sent into weather. Outside, spring light lay pale across the stones. Her father was waiting near the steps. May I write? He asked. Alara considered him. Considered the frightened king who had sent a daughter away to satisfy a stronger court. Considered the man who had signed away the hostage clauses today with shaking hands and no excuses. You may write, she said. I may not answer. His eyes lowered. That is fair. It is, she said. Then she walked past him. Lysander matched her pace down the steps. For several minutes, neither of them spoke. Vesper walked ahead of them with the satisfied trot of an animal who had attended a major political proceeding and found most of it poorly organized. At the carriage, Bryn pointed at Alara. Sit, she said. Alara sat. Mira climbed in beside her, released a breath that sounded as if she had been holding it since winter, and began to laugh. It was not elegant laughter. It was a little too close to crying. Alara found, after a startled moment, that she was laughing too. Lysander stood outside the carriage and looked at both of them with the cautious expression of a man observing an unfamiliar medical event. Is this normal? He asked Bryn. For women who have just survived a hall full of fools? Yes. Useful to know, he said. Vesper put his front paws on the carriage step, decided this was insufficiently dignified, and waited until Lysander boosted the rest of him in. He could have jumped, Alara said. I know, Lysander said. Vesper settled with half his body across Alara's skirts and the other half across Lysander's boots, pleased with the arrangement. They went north. After that, life did not become simple. Alara would have distrusted it if it had. Black Claw's inquiry lasted through the spring and into summer. Aldrich's authority continued to shrink by increments, each one recorded, witnessed, and argued over by men who had suddenly remembered the value of procedure. Kale did not become king. Not then. He remained in Black Claw as a prince under council restriction, doing work that was less dramatic than regret and more useful than apologies. Opening records, naming stewards, dissolving ward contracts, and signing away powers his father had treated as permanent. Saran sent letters. Elara read some of them. Not all. Her father wrote carefully, without demanding forgiveness, which made the letters easier to keep in the drawer and harder to throw into the fire. Mira became Bryn's assistant and discovered a talent for making difficult patients obey instructions by looking at them with wide, disappointed eyes. Bryn called it a valuable clinical skill. Elara became, by gradual accident and then by formal appointment, the Northern Reach's advisor on Southern courts and tribute law. The first time Lysander placed a stack of treaty drafts on her kitchen table and asked for her opinion, she stared at him. "You want my opinion?" "No," he said. "I want your corrections. Opinions take longer." She corrected 17 clauses, crossed out 3 insults disguised as concessions, rewrote a grain provision that would have quietly harmed 2 border villages, and added a witness requirement that made Lysander look at the page for a long time. "Black Claw used this loophole?" he asked. "For years." He handed her another pen. By the time labor came, Elara had her own desk in the Northern Hall and a reputation among visiting diplomats as a woman who smiled politely while removing the trap from their sentence and placing it on the table where everyone could see it. The birth began on a rainy night at the end of spring. Lysander spent most of it outside the door because Bryn had informed him that his size was not medically helpful. He accepted this with dignity for approximately 10 minutes, then chopped far more firewood than the house could possibly need. Mira carried hot water. Vesper refused to leave the rug outside Elara's room and growled once, not at any person, but at a thunderclap that had apparently failed to submit proper identification. Just before dawn, Elara heard her daughter cry. The sound was small and furious and alive. Bryn placed the baby in her arms, wrapped in a soft gray blanket. The girl had dark hair, a wrinkled red face, and the offended expression of someone who had been warm and comfortable and was now expected to tolerate weather. "A girl," Bryn said. Elara looked down at her. For a moment she thought of the Moon Oath Hall, the Eastern Gate, the Snow Road, the fallen tree, the way station fire, the witness rail, the document on the altar. Then the baby opened her tiny fist and pressed it against Elara's skin, and the past moved back to where it belonged. Not gone. Not forgiven. Behind her. "Hello, Ren," Elara said. The baby made a small, unimpressed sound. "Strong review," Bryn said. "Clear lungs. Very judgmental. Promising." Elara laughed, and it hurt, and she did not care. Then Bryn went still. Not frightened. Not panicked. Still. Elara knew that stillness. It was the stillness of a woman listening to something no one else in the room had heard yet. "Bryn," Elara said. Bryn put one hand on Elara's shoulder. "Don't waste fear. Breathe. There is another one." Mira, who had just set down a basin, made a sound that would not have survived review in any formal court. Outside the door, the chopping stopped. Vesper lifted his head from the rug, sneezed once, and pressed his nose against the bottom of the door as if demanding a procedural update. The second baby came with less ceremony and more outrage. When Bryn laid her beside her sister, the room fell into a silence too full to be called quiet. "Two girls," Bryn said, with the brisk satisfaction of a woman who had won an argument no one else had known was taking place. "Both loud. Both offended. Both very much here." Elara stared at them. The first baby had already gone back to sleep with a clenched fist near her chin. The second glared at the ceiling with the focused resentment of a person reviewing building standards. They were tiny, red, damp, impossible, and alike enough that Elara felt the world tilt and settle again around a new shape. "Ren," she said, touching the first girl's blanket. Then she looked at the second, who had begun kicking one foot free, as if preparing to leave a place she had just arrived in. "Lark," Elara said. Lark objected to the weather again. Elara laughed once more, and this time she cried too, because apparently the body had its own opinions about what counted as too much feeling for one morning. When Lysander was finally allowed in, he entered as if approaching a sleeping army. He looked at Elara first, checking her face, her color, the steadiness of her breathing. Only after she nodded did he look at the blankets in her arms. Both blankets. Something in his expression changed then. It was not dramatic. Lysander did very few dramatic things. It was simply the quiet astonishment of a man who had seen war, winter, courts, borders, and wolves, and had apparently not been prepared for two 6-pound girls with matching fists under their chins. "This is Wren," Elara said. "And this is Lark." "Wren and Lark," he repeated, as if committing the names to law. "You can hold one," Elara said. "Only one?" he asked, which was apparently the wrong question to ask in a room managed by Bryn. "You can learn on one," Bryn said. "Then we will decide if the other deserves the same risk." He held out his arms. Elara placed Wren carefully against him. Lysander held her with the grave concentration of a man entrusted with a fragile treaty, a priceless weapon, and a loaf of bread he was afraid to crush. Wren stopped fussing, blinked once, and went to sleep against his chest as if she had reviewed him and found him adequate. Lark opened one eye. Lysander looked down at her. "She disapproves." "She is new," Elara said. "Give her time." Vesper, after being allowed into the room under strict supervision, sniffed the edge of Wren's blanket, sniffed the edge of Lark's blanket, sneezed softly, and lay down beside the bed with his chin on Elara's slipper. "He approves," Elara said. "That is a relief," Lysander said. "I was concerned about the political implications of failing both inspections." Weeks passed, then months. The northern summer was brief and bright. Wren grew rounder first. Lark learned to yell first. Vesper became their self-appointed floor supervisor, positioning himself near any blanket on which either girl was placed, and looking personally offended when adults stepped over his tail. Mira visited every afternoon and claimed it was to help Bryn, though she mostly came to let the twins grip her fingers with solemn tyranny. Elara worked when she wanted to work, rested when she needed to rest, and learned the strange discipline of not earning her right to remain every hour of every day. That was harder than treaty law. Lysander did not ask her for promises. He did not turn kindness into debt. He came to her house for dinner, accepted Vesper's increasingly unreasonable seating arrangements, held Wren when Elara needed both hands, held Lark when Wren objected to fairness, and listened when Elara spoke of the southern courts with a precision that never confused being wounded with being weak. One evening in late summer, after both girls had finally gone to sleep and Vesper had wedged himself under the table in a way that trapped both of Lysander's boots, Elara stood at the open door and looked out at the courtyard herb garden. It was green now, not dormant, not waiting under snow. Lysander came to stand beside her. "Black Claw sent another packet," he said. "I saw it. Do you want to open it?" "Tomorrow," she said. He nodded. She looked at him. "You never ask what I plan to do about Kale. Do you need me to?" "No." "Then I won't." She looked back at the garden. "I don't hate him the way I thought I would." "No. No. Hatred would require carrying him more than I want to." Lysander was quiet for a moment. "That seems sensible." "It is very sensible," she said. "I am famous for it." "Among whom?" "Myself. Occasionally Vesper." Vesper, from under the table, thumped his tail once without getting up. Lysander's mouth moved in the small, controlled way that meant he was nearly smiling. Elara rested one hand on the doorframe. The wood was smooth beneath her palm. Her own door. Her own house. Her daughters sleeping in the next room. Her dog occupying half the floor. A northern king beside her who had never once asked her to shrink so he could feel large. "Lysander," she said. He turned his head. "If you are still offering a place," she said. "Not shelter, not protection, not a political arrangement. A place beside me. You may ask again." He looked at her for a long moment. The northern evening moved around them, cool and gold. "Elara," he said very carefully, "may I stand beside you?" She considered pretending to think about it longer. It would have been deserved. It also would have been unnecessary. "Yes," she said. He exhaled once, almost silently. Vesper chose that moment to crawl out from under the table, step directly between them, and sit on Lysander's feet. Lysander looked down. "He objects?" "No," Elara said. "He negotiates terms." "What are they?" "You keep feeding him. You accept that any chair near the fire is partly his. You never move too quickly near the babies. Reasonable. And you understand that I am not being rescued." Lysander looked back at her. "I understood that at the border," he said. That was when she kissed him. It was not a courtly kiss. It was not witnessed by priests, sealed by silver, or arranged beneath a ceiling built to frighten people into obedience. It happened in the open doorway of a small northern house while two babies slept in the next room, and a large dog sat on a king's boots with proprietary satisfaction. It was, Alara thought, the first vow in her life that did not feel like a chain. A year later, when the Black Claw Council formally removed Aldrich from the throne and appointed a temporary regency until the southern houses could agree on succession terms, the news reached Varath in the same packet as a set of revised treaty clauses and a letter from Kale. Alara read the clauses first. They were better than the old ones. Not perfect. Better. She marked 3 corrections in the margin before opening the letter. It was short. I will not ask to see them. I will not ask to be forgiven. The ward contracts are gone. My father is gone from power. I am leaving Black Claw for the western marches until the council decides what to do with my name. I hope they grow up in a house where no one teaches them that silence is the price of safety. There was no signature beyond his initial. Alara folded the letter and placed it in the drawer with the others. She did not burn it. She did not answer it. Outside, Ren was learning to walk by gripping Vesper's fur with both hands while the dog stood with heroic patience and the expression of a creature enduring historic injustice. Lark sat 3 feet away, watching this method with the narrow-eyed seriousness of a rival engineer. Lysander hovered nearby, pretending not to hover. Mira stood with a basket of herbs and offered deeply unhelpful commentary. She's going to be faster than all of us, Mira said. Which one? Alara asked. Yes, Mira said. Ren took 2 determined steps, lost her balance, and landed sitting on Vesper's front paw. Vesper looked at Alara. Don't look at me, Alara said. You approved her. The dog sighed and stayed exactly where he was. Lark then crawled to Lysander, ignored his outstretched hand, grabbed his sleeve instead, and used him to pull herself upright with the calm entitlement of a girl born into a world that would have to explain itself to her. Alara watched them from the garden path. The northern wind moved through the herbs. The house door stood open behind her. No guard waited to escort her. No court waited to name her useful or finished. No old king sat above her deciding which parts of her life belonged to policy. There were still letters to answer, treaties to correct, borders to watch, and twin daughters to raise. There would be hard winters. There would be arguments. There would be days when the past returned without invitation and sat too close to the fire. But when Alara stepped forward, Ren turned toward her and laughed. Lark, offended by being late to the reaction, laughed louder. Vesper's tail thumped once against the ground. Lysander looked up at her, steady and quiet, with no claim in his eyes and no demand in his hands. Alara walked to them. This time, no one had to open the gate for her. She was already home. For years later, the final Black Claw Treaty reached the northern reach under winter escort. By then, Ren and Lark were old enough to outrun 3 adults, outargue 1 diplomat, and hide under Lysander's council table with the confidence of people who believed all furniture had been built for strategic purposes. The treaty did not come with ceremony. Kale brought it himself because the council wanted a Black Claw signature witnessed by Northern Law, Saran Law, and the woman whose life had made the old ward system indefensible. He waited at the outer way station until Alara sent permission for him to enter the settlement square. He came without guards. He carried no ceremonial chain. The repaired wolf tooth hung at his belt now, visible, not as a plea and not as a claim. A record. Alara met him outside the northern hall with Lysander at her side, Mira behind her with the witness ledger, Bryn pretending she had not come for entertainment, and Vesper sitting in front of the steps like an old magistrate who had finally found his proper office. The twins were supposed to remain inside. They did not. 2 small girls in dark wool coats slipped around the hall door, identical enough to make visiting envoys nervous, and different enough that Alara could tell which one had planned the escape by the angle of the chin. Ren held Lark's sleeve. Lark held a biscuit she had not been issued. Kale saw them. For a moment, no one moved. The resemblance did what blood always does when adults try to make it behave like law. It arrived without asking. The girls had Alara's mouth and stubborn posture. They had Kale's dark eyes. They had Black Claw's sharp cheekbones, softened by northern weather and childhood freedom. They looked nothing like a claim. They looked like themselves. Ren studied him first. Lark studied him second, mostly because she was chewing. You look like us, Ren said. The words landed more cleanly than accusation would have. Kale lowered himself to one knee, not close enough to frighten them, not close enough to invite touch. Snow collected on the shoulder of his dark coat. Yes, he said. I do. Are you a relative? Lark asked. Kale's hand closed once near the repaired tooth. Then it opened again. By blood, he said. Not by right. The answer was too careful for children, and exactly careful enough for the adults standing behind them. Wren frowned. That is a strange answer. It is, Kale said. Lark offered him half the biscuit after considering the matter. Then she withdrew it when Vesper leaned forward with sudden legal interest. Elara looked at Kale. There was grief in his face, but it had learned manners. It did not reach for her daughters. It did not ask her to soften the room for him. He placed the treaty packet on the stone bench between them. The last word clauses are dead, he said. Black Claw has signed. Saran has signed. The southern houses have signed. No child will be sent as tribute again. Mira opened the ledger. Bryn stopped pretending not to listen. Lysander looked at the document, not at Kale, which was his version of mercy. Elara read every line. The girls grew bored halfway through the second clause and began teaching Vesper a game with unclear rules and serious consequences for anyone holding food. At the bottom of the page, where Black Claw's seal used to sit above all the others, 3 seals now stood level: Black Claw, Saran, and the Northern Reach. Beneath them was a 4th mark, not royal, not dynastic, but witnessed by treaty law: Elara of Saran, protected party and legal petitioner. She signed last. Kale watched the ink dry. Then he stepped back. May I write to them when they are older? He asked. Elara capped the ink. You may write to me first. I will decide what reaches them until they can decide for themselves. He bowed his head. That is fair. It is, she said. Wren tugged Elara's sleeve. Do we have to look like him? Elara crouched until she was level with both girls. You look like yourselves. Some pieces came from me. Some pieces came from blood. Some pieces came from the north because this is where you learn to walk. None of those pieces owns you. Lark considered that. Can one piece come from Vesper? Vesper wagged his tail once, as if acknowledging a reasonable legal theory. Lysander said very gravely, We should not encourage that argument in treaty court. The girls laughed. Kale looked away for a moment, and when he looked back, his face had settled into something quieter than regret. He left before sunset. No one chased him. No one begged him to stay. No one pretended the past had become harmless because one good document had finally been signed. Elara stood on the northern steps with the treaty copy in her hand, her daughters arguing over whether Vesper counted as a witness, and Lysander beside her, shoulder near hers, not blocking the road and not standing in front of her. The gate remained open. This time, it did not mean exile. It meant anyone who entered would answer to the law she had helped write. Wren and Lark ran ahead into the square, Vesper trotting after them with offended dignity and obvious devotion. Elara followed at her own pace. Behind her, the old treaty system was ink and ash. Ahead of her, 2 little girls were shouting for the Northern King to hurry up because the dog had already ruled on the game and they needed an adult to appeal. Lysander looked at Elara. Do I have jurisdiction? He asked. No, she said. But you may try. He went after them. Elara watched him lose the appeal almost immediately. The laugh that left her did not hurt this time. It moved cleanly through the cold air, past the open gate, and into the place she had chosen. Please consider subscribing and leaving a comment if you want more stories like this.